What's up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. I'm Ian. I'm the author of TechInterview.guide, the website. Tonight, I'm basically going to be going through a whole bunch of questions that I got scrolling at the bottom of the screen. Probably not going to get through all of them, but the goal on Sundays is basically to help you get ready for your job hunt for the week. And so we're going to be going through some of these questions. Like I said, probably not all of them, but we'll get through probably a good chunk of them and kind of see if folks show up in chat and kind of what other things come to mind that people want to chat about kind of as we go. All right, so let's get started with these questions. So these are just questions that were submitted to me privately or publicly. There are public forums that I hang out in where people ask questions. So some of the questions are coming from these public forums. And I'm also happy to take questions in chat kind of as we go. So if you got questions as we go, please drop them in chat and say hello. So let's get started. The first one on the list, do you think it's right for companies to give week-long coding challenges as part of the interview process and then not selecting you afterward? So that's multi-part question. I think a lot of companies they're still doing part of like kind of that leak code grind that we talked about last week and how to shortcut those leak code sort of challenges. And I think more and more companies are seeing the value in these take-home assignments. Now, what should a take-home assignment involve? In my opinion, a take-home assignment should be very indicative of what you're going to be doing on the job day to day. So if you're going to be doing, say, Ruby on Rails programming, the take-home challenge better be a Ruby on Rails project of some kind. When we talked with Jesse at Ibotta a couple of weeks ago, Jesse mentioned his company actually gives out a kind of a take-home assignment, but the assignment is really just, hey, review this code. Take a look at this code, because when we bring you in for the interview, we're going to be asking you questions about it. And that could be anywhere from, fix a bug, implement a feature, or just do a code review for us. Tell us what you think. And I think more companies are seeing the value in that kind of take home where you get to evaluate the code ahead of time, and then part of the interview process then is showing what you're going to be like as a collaborative team member. How are you going to do those code reviews? How are you going to give feedback? What do you see that's good? What do you see that's not good? Are you going to be honest about it, or are you just going to be like, oh yeah, this code's great? Or are you really going to be honest and say, well, I think that this part could be optimized, this part could be changed. If we ask you to implement a change or fix a bug or something like that, would you be able to easily go in and do that? It's a little bit similar to a process I did back in the day, about a decade ago, actually, where I would give someone like kind of on the phone screen, I would have them kind of talk me through a challenge and then say, okay, well, your take home assignment is to build a little web application about this and submit that. And then we'll take a look through your code quality and how you test it and so on as part of the on-site interview. So how do I feel about week-long coding challenges? I think a week long is excessive. I would say any company that's doing this right should expect no more than 2 or 3 hours of your time. I've heard of more and more companies paying people for their time, even if they don't get selected. If you do get selected, you get a job, so that's pretty great payment. If you don't get selected, you should at least get paid a little bit of something for your time. And I think that you could definitely ask companies if they're willing to do that. They may push back and say, no, this is just part of our process. And then it's up to you if you want to go ahead and work on that coding challenge. But I would say if you're given a code challenge and they say, we expect this to take a week, I would definitely be asking for some kind of compensation and say, you know what, I've got another job or I've got other responsibilities. Like, is this going to be compensated time? And if they say no, I wouldn't continue in the process personally. I think giving somebody a week of free effort is not a great start. The second part of the question is like, you work on this thing for a week long and not getting picked afterward. I mean, that kind of goes with the territory, honestly. Whenever you apply for a job and you're going through that interview process, at any point you could get rejected. So did you get rejected specifically because of the code that you built? Or did you get rejected because of something else along the way? There's no like morality, I think, involved in asking you to do like a take-home project and then not pick you. Some companies use that take-home challenge as part of their sort of selection process. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Next one on the list, will a follow-up email affect the hiring decision? I do know of companies that when they do their first rounds of interviews, they wait to see which candidates send a thank you note, and then those are the candidates that move on to the next stage. I think that that's a dangerous precedent. I think not everybody has in mind to send a thank you note. I think if you can send a thank you note, I think it's a great thing to do. Being grateful for their time and the effort that they took to interview you, I think is always great. Would it affect the actual hiring decision? Probably not. I've probably already made my choice by then. But if that follow-up email gives additional information that maybe I asked for, and you're submitting that as part of that email, it might influence things a little bit, but generally by then the company's probably already made a hiring decision of some kind, or whether or not to move forward with you. So I don't know that it would actually influence anything or not. Next one on the list, what are some good questions to ask during final round interviews in engineering? I think I want to basically do a whole topic some Sunday night on like what kinds of questions we should be asking as part of the interview process. You should certainly be asking questions as part of the company research. So as you're getting to know someone at the company, or meeting people that know about the company, asking questions before you ever get into the interview, I think is important. Once you're in the interview, you certainly want to have questions for them. One of the biggest things you don't want to do is when they say, do you have any questions for me? And you say, nope. It shows that you haven't done maybe as much research, or you haven't put a lot of thought into that kind of thing. So I would always have some kinds of questions, and I'm going to go into like what kinds of questions in another stream, but just really briefly, just to answer this one, like what are some good questions to ask? I think it depends a little bit on who's interviewing you in the moment. If it's a kind of a peer engineer, like someone else on the development team that you're going to be working with, you could certainly ask them like what their day is going to be like, although that's starting to get a little cliche. But you could ask, what do they like about their job? How long have they been at the job? What keeps them there? I was actually asked that during an interview, and it blew me away that someone thought to ask me that. You could ask, what about your day-to-day process do you really enjoy? What part of that process do you not enjoy? For the things that you don't enjoy, why haven't you changed it? Or why haven't you asked to change it? You could ask those kinds of things. Do you like the technologies that you use? If you could introduce a new technology, what would that be? Can you tell me a little bit about the last code review that you did? Or what would mentorship look like between you and I if I joined the team? Would you be involved in mentoring and sort of onboarding me as a developer? Those would be kinds of good questions for a peer engineer. I would say if it's a manager, director kind of role, you could ask about the role itself. Like, is this a backfill? Am I filling in for someone else that left? And can you speak to why they left? They probably won't say a whole lot about it. Honestly, in my experience, HR will be pretty hush-hush on like, don't tell anybody the reasons why so-and-so left. But you could just say, or they may say something like, oh, that other person, they resigned for a different opportunity. They're probably not going to tell you like, oh yeah, they were grossly incompetent and we fired them, because that would border on privileged information. So you're probably not going to get the whole story, but you could ask whether it's a new role, like are they building a whole new team, or is this kind of like a replacement, or what we call a backfill. You could also ask questions of management, like how often could I meet with you to make sure that I'm meeting your expectations when I'm onboarding? This isn't meant to be like, how often can I check in with you to make sure you're happy with me so I can ask you for a raise? This is just, you're going to have some expectation about how my onboarding is going to go. How often are we going to check in to make sure that I'm on track? You could ask those kinds of questions to management. And when I get into more of these questions in another show, I think I'll talk about the kinds of questions that I would ask both, and then how I would compare those answers. So we'll get into that another time. Next on the list, how can we ask for more time to prepare for an interview? I've actually had this one come up quite a bit. And it's usually like, oh, I haven't studied enough. or I don't know if I'm ready for the interview yet. Like, how can I ask for more time? I would say if something has come up in life and you just need more time, absolutely, you can ask for more time. You can just say, hey, something came up at home, or I need to take care of, my kids at home, or my car's in the shop. I'm not going to make it. Could I delay the interview? Most companies are pretty amenable to that. They're generally going to be okay. It really depends on what the circumstance is and how you sort of portray that. You don't want to give away too many personal details as part of that, but you do want to be honest with them. Like if something is legitimately coming up, you want to be honest with them and tell them as early as possible. You don't want to tell them the morning of, hey, I can't make it to the interview today, unless there is an emergency. Then you can say, like, an emergency came up, I need to postpone. But if you're just not feeling ready, I don't know, part of me wants to tell you just go for it anyway. Like by this point, you know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. I mean, my job as the interviewer is just to find out what you do know and what you don't know, and then figure out whether that's going to fit in on my team. And so it's okay not to know everything. It's okay not to have answers when you go to those interviews. I think that it can show good character for how you can kind of like talk your way out of a question when you don't have an answer. You can say like, hey, my curiosity hasn't taken me there yet, or I haven't learned that particular topic yet. Again, my job as the interviewer is to find out what you know and what you don't know. And if you know all the things, great. If there's certain things that you don't know, that's okay too. Again, it's just my job to figure out what you know and what you don't know. So if you do need more time, like, oh, I haven't studied enough and I know they're going to ask me about this and I just haven't done it. I would ask yourself, like, why didn't you study? Like, what happened that you didn't have enough time to study? Which is kind of a touchy subject. It does get a little personal on those kinds of things. Hey, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it. I think that there can be questions around, like, why didn't you prepare? Like, did you not budget your time, or did something come up along the way? Like, if you're just trying to stall so that you can study a little bit longer, that might be okay for really big companies who are always hiring. For small companies, for startups, like they're trying to hire now and they may only have one or two roles. And if you delay it, they're going to be interviewing other people, and they may be more likely to fill that role. If you say, hey, I need a couple of weeks, I need a month, you're less likely to get that job. If it's a company that's kind of mid-sized to large size and they're just constantly hiring, like you're constantly seeing job postings for them, you could probably delay no problem. Especially if it's like a FANG company, no big deal at all. Call the recruiter and say, hey, I need to postpone 6 weeks. You may not even need to give a reason why, and that'd totally be okay. They'll be all right with that because they're constantly hiring folks. But yeah, you want to be polite about it. You want to let them know as soon as possible. So if you need more time to prepare, just ask. Next one on the list, how do you answer brain teaser questions like how many windows are in your city? This is sometimes framed as, if you were going to charge money to wash every window in your city, how much money would you charge? This can also be asked like, how many gas stations are there in your city, or how many golf balls fit in a school bus? All these kinds of sort of brain teaser kinds of questions are out there. Some of them are meant just to kind of break the ice a little bit, just to get you thinking a little bit and to hear your critical thinking kind of on the fly. Some of those questions, though, are a little weird in nature, and some people just don't like answering those kinds of questions. I'm guilty of asking those kinds of questions in the past. In fact, I used to ask the gas station one, how many gas stations were there in Los Angeles? And we would get a lot of different people like kind of breaking the problem down in a lot of similar ways. And honestly, it didn't give a lot of good signals around, oh yeah, this person's clearly thinking about this thing differently. Very rarely would we get any like groundbreaking, like, whoa, we never would have thought of that. Like, that's a great way to think about that kind of problem. Most people don't answer those kinds of questions in any way that gives off good information to us as interviewers to tell us that, you're a better candidate than someone else. If you do get asked the question, you should make an attempt to answer the question. Like, you don't want to stall and be like, well, I don't really know how to answer that kind of question. Like, you want to take a crack at it. But yeah, just keep in mind, it's not giving them very good signals. really, they're just trying to test your critical thinking on the spot. How would you start to break a problem down? For something like how many windows are in your city? I mean, you could go by population, you could go by number of houses, lots of different things, and then make assumptions about those. How many buildings are there? What's the average number of floors, the average number of windows per floor? You could start breaking those things down. It's really just how do you take a really vague idea and break it down into smaller and smaller steps, which honestly does play a little bit into the kinds of technical challenges that we tend to do in these interviews. It's really coming down to how do you take an idea or a concept and start breaking that down into smaller pieces that you could solve. Cool. What's up, Dota 2? Good to see you in chat. Developer interviews have gotten downright weird for them trying to figure out if you can do the job. Yeah, I agree. I think the Leak Code Tech Challenge, I think, is good for testing that you can kind of examine a problem and break it down and start to actually solve it in code. But again, the Leak Code style problems are typically not very indicative of what you're doing on the job. And so while it does give good signals to us as interviewers about how you think through a problem, how you break it down, it doesn't necessarily give you a good signal as a candidate of what your day-to-day responsibilities are going to be like at the company. So there is a pretty big disconnect there, I agree. Yeah, how many golf balls can you fit in a school bus? How's that going to determine if I can code? Exactly. It doesn't. But it does tell us a little bit about how you think. But I mean, there's so many unknowns, like how big is the bus? How tall is the bus? Are the seats in the bus? If the seats are out, I can fit a lot more golf balls in there. Is the front door open? If so, they're going to like start to fall out after a certain point. Are the windows down? If so, I can't go right to the ceiling. Is the ceiling rounded or square? You know, and so it also comes down to a little bit of like, what kinds of clarifying questions do you ask? You know, it can vary quite a lot. So cool. Moving on to the next question. Let's see. Is it a bad sign to be kept waiting for a long time before the start of a job interview? I actually saw something about this recently. Someone said, oh yeah, my boss makes everybody wait an hour. So they tell you the interview is going to start at 9, and you get there, you show up, you're nervous, and then they just make you sit there for like an hour. And they wait to see how many people just get up and walk out. And if you walk out, clearly you didn't want the job. If you sit around, you wait, then they'll actually interview you, and then you're actually considered. I think that's a stupid thing to do. Personally, I think it's a rotten thing to do. If they're treating you like that as an applicant for the job, what are they going to treat you like as an employee? The interview process should be as respectful as possible. And I think that if they force you to wait on purpose, I think it's a bad sign. If just something came up, like, you know, they're busy, or your interview's right after lunch and everybody's, you know, coming back and someone's a couple of minutes late, no big deal. I mean, it would be nice if they were on time, but it's not really a deal breaker for something like that. But if they're like purposely making you wait, like you get there at 9 and they don't see you till like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs, literally doing nothing, then yeah, it's a waste of time. And that would be a signal that I would not want to work there for sure. And so, you know, pay attention to those kinds of things, how they treat you as an applicant, where they're trying to win you over. Like, yeah, you're there to interview them, they're there to interview you. And a lot of people have this concept of like, you know, only they matter, right? And so you kind of have to jump through their hoops, but at the same time, you also matter as a human. And how they treat you is indicative of what they're going to treat you like as an employee. And so the amount of respect and the amount of, you know, time that they make you wait, do they even offer you something to drink while you wait, or a snack or something like that? Like, those are all indicators of how they're going to treat you as an employee. So you definitely want to be like making notes about those kinds of things. You know, if you do show up and they make you wait. I was taught a long time ago that showing up late to something is a sign of disrespect. That if you really respect someone, you're going to respect their time and you're going to show up early. Showing up on time is kind of the same as being late for me. But you know, everyone treats that a little bit differently, which I understand. So I can't put everybody into the same mold that of my own upbringing. I can't project that onto other people. But if you're late for an interview, like you're going to look bad to the whole company, not just the person that's interviewing you. But if I'm late for interviewing you, like you're coming to my company and I'm late, then that's showing disrespect to you in my mind. And so I would be really harsh against my employees for showing up late. So yeah, it's a mutual respect kind of thing. Next one that was on the list: how much content of the book Cracking the Coding Interview is outdated now? I think that I wouldn't say that book is timeless, but I think that there's a lot of valid information in that book. There are definitely changes that have happened over the years to the interview process, and I think they're on like their 5th or 6th release of that book now. And so you definitely want a newer copy. I think the newest one I saw was like 2018. Was the last published copy that I saw, like the actual hardcover or the printed version of the book. I would say if you can get a new, like the newest copy possible, if you're gonna buy a copy of that book, I would say buy like the newest edition possible. You'll have as much up-to-date information as you can. But even if 2018 was the last published version, that's 3 years ago, and a lot can change in 3 years. We saw how much has changed just in the last year and a half with the pandemic and going remote, and how that really changed the face of the tech industry. And I have a feeling there are going to be a lot more books coming out around like handling hybrid work and doing remote interviews and things like that. I think we're going to see a lot more information come out of that sort of thing. So yeah, I would definitely get a new copy of that. King of Conquests, appreciate the follow, man. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Feel free to drop questions in chat as well. I've got this list of questions I'm going through, but if you've got questions about the tech interview process, please drop them in chat. I'm happy to kind of bring those into things as we go here. I'm about a third of the way, maybe actually almost halfway through my questions. So hopefully y'all got some questions as well. And if we got some time, I may pull up a resume for review. But I may just do a short stream and then talk about Thursday a little bit. Let's see, where do we go from there? So someone asked in chat, best type of questions as the interviewer to ask to figure out a developer's tech skills. I think that was one of the ones at the bottom of the list. The best types of questions. So as an interviewer, the kinds of questions that I ask you are really to kind of suss out how much of that topic do you know. Like if I've got a job opportunity for a Python developer, I'm going to ask you lots of different kinds of questions about Python to find out how much Python you know. And as soon as I start to kind of get a sense of like, oh, okay, well, that's about the limit of your knowledge, I may still ask a couple of additional questions, not to make you feel foolish, because, at some point you've said, I don't have an answer, or given me some indication that, that's the limit of your knowledge. If I ask more questions, that's not me, making you feel silly to have to repeat yourself saying, I said I don't know, like that's all I know about Python. It's really just, like maybe there's a little bit extra that, just by asking a different question, it like jogs your memory, for example. So like, for example, if I ask what CRUD is, and you're like, oh yeah, that's like create and read, but I can't remember the other two. And then I start asking some other questions. You're like, oh, update and delete, that's what the other things were. And so sometimes by asking additional questions, it can sort of like trigger your memory a little bit. And so we may keep pushing on questions to try to find out what are the limits of your knowledge really. Follow up in chat. I used to do behavioral questions and then have a dialogue. Behavioral questions are definitely a part of the interview process, although you're less likely to get asked behavioral questions from like a peer engineer or a peer developer. You're more likely to get asked those by HR and management folks, because they want to know, like, tell me about a time when. That's basically every behavioral question. Tell me about a time when communication between team members didn't work out. What did that look like? Or tell me about a time when you took responsibility for something that needed to be done, and you didn't want to wait to be asked, and you just took initiative. Those are questions that are going to be asked more from like an HR type of person or a manager type of person, as opposed to a peer developer. Peer developer, they're going to be asking you about technical things. because they're in the trenches. They're working with those technologies, and so they're going to be the ones to really ask, like, what do you know about the programming language or the framework or the libraries they use or test-driven development or just day-to-day, like how do you use Git, how do you do code reviews? Like those are going to be asked more by like a peer developer during that interview stage. Also in chat, I saw a company in town trying to hire for domain-driven design. Seems like kind of a red flag. Domain-driven design. To me, I mean, I haven't heard that term specifically, but to me that feels a little bit more like system design, where they're getting you to design like part of a system. But if you want to drop a definition in chat, oh, the Java architecture. Okay, I wouldn't say that that's really a red flag. I mean, if they've got specific questions that they want you to know or that are important to them, they're just going to ask those kinds of questions. At the same time, we need to make sure as interviewers that we're asking relevant questions and that we're asking things that are relevant to the day-to-day, but that we're not just asking, well, I got asked this question, so I'm going to ask you this question. Which tends to come up around technical challenges, like I got asked a recursion problem when I interviewed here, so I'm going to give you a recursion problem, because if you're going to work with me, you should know what I know. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of interviewers work that haven't had good training about how to be an interviewer, is they just kind of echo back the interview process that they went through. And that's not necessarily a good thing, especially if they've been at the company for a while. They need to be up to date with more up-to-date kinds of interviewing skills and how to kind of get those signals. So what questions should be asked? So is it a red flag that they're asking for things about Java architecture? I mean, if it's a Java job, that's fair game. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. So yeah, so going back to cracking the coding interview, I would say, again, just find the latest copy that you can. Now, older copies, they're still going to have relevant information in there about the kinds of things you can study. It'll have examples of behavioral questions that I think are still good questions to ask. It may also cover some technical topics and design patterns and things like that that are still relevant. But yeah, the newer copies are going to be more up to date with what interview scenarios are going to be like nowadays. All right, next one on the list. Let's see. What's an example of a job interview question designed to make the applicant uncomfortable? There are several of these. Some of them are illegal to ask. And so I would say in your sort of geographic area, it's important to know what kinds of questions you should not be asked in an interview. As an applicant to the job, you may not know. You're not allowed to ask me that question. Things about like religious status, marital status, political affiliation, whether or not you drink alcohol, whether or not you have children. I think I covered, are you married? Like they're not allowed to ask those kinds of questions. They are not allowed to straight up ask you those questions. However, when you come in and you go to the interview and they sit you down and you're, with the receptionist, they offer you some water. When someone comes out to get you and they start saying like, oh, we're just going to like go walk down this hall and get you set up, the interview has already started. They may make comments, ask questions, that sound innocent enough that you may volunteer information that you don't need to or that you don't mean to. And I've heard some advice like, on that walk to the room, stay quiet. I would say you still have to be kind of friendly, because if you just refuse to flat out say anything and treat it like, I'm not saying anything without my lawyer present kind of attitude, you're going to come off cold, and that's an impression that you're giving the company. So everybody that greets you walking in the door and even walking you down into that room, they're all making sort of impressions of you, and all of those impressions play into whether they should hire you. But for example, if I had someone, for an interview on a Monday, and while we're walking down that hall, I ask like, hey, how was your weekend? Did you have a good weekend? Did you do anything fun? Anything you tell me can and will be used against you in the court of my interview. If you start saying things like, oh yeah, I hung out with the family, it's like I'm making a little mental list of all the things I'm not legally allowed to ask you, but you're volunteering. So I'm kind of checking off like, oh, married. Oh, did I see a ring on their finger? Are they married? Do they have kids? What kind of family? Are they like in town? You know, I could ask like, oh, what kinds of things did you do on the weekend? And you're like, oh, I went to a party. It's like, oh, okay, well, I can start to make implications of, all right, you're kind of a party person, you know, and I can start to build sort of judgments and bias for or against you based on what you say. And so there are questions that we're not allowed to ask. When it comes to just straight up questions, I mean, if it's designed to make you uncomfortable, then it's a bad question and they're a bad interviewer. Straight up. They shouldn't be asking you anything to make you uncomfortable on purpose. Now, that said, there are questions that they may ask that will just feel uncomfortable to talk about. For example, if you get let go from a job, if you're fired or terminated from a job, they may bring that up. That's going to be uncomfortable. But that kind of question isn't designed to make you uncomfortable. It's designed to get information from you about why, from your perspective, did you get dismissed from that job. And so those are important differences. But there should be no questions during the interview which are specifically designed to make you uncomfortable. There are like weird, quirky questions that are designed to be impossible to answer. Like, tell me something that, tell me 2 or 3 things that your old coworkers would tell me about you that you would say are not true. Well, if you think about that for a minute, what are they asking? They're asking what you think someone else would say about you that you think isn't true. So if I said, well, I worked with so-and-so, and they would tell you that I'm always late to meetings, but I don't think that's true. Well, if you think they would say that you're always late to meetings, it's probably because you've been late to meetings in the past. And so that kind of question is kind of meant to trick you a little bit into telling me what you don't want to tell me. And so there's a subtle difference in there. But I would say if you start to detect those kinds of questions, there's no easy way to sort of shut those down and say like, hey, you know what, I don't appreciate these questions, because it is part of an interview. But you can certainly just answer them to the point and say, I can't really speculate on what my coworkers would say about me. I can provide a list of references and you can ask them directly, something along those lines, just to kind of defer the question a little bit. Let's see, in chat, how do you answer what is the right answer? Do you like working independently or as part of a team? I would say it depends a little bit on the culture of the company. I think if the company is like kind of remote or a hybrid kind of remote in person, I would say either way, you need to let them know you're a team player. Like you're willing to work with other people. Maybe you work best alone. Maybe you work best if you're like pair programming with somebody, or you're on a team with lots of other people where you kind of bounce ideas off of one another. Those are important characteristics, even if you do feel like you're better working independently. I think that it's still important to have an awareness of how you work best to be able to answer that question. I think being able to work independently is important, especially if you're in a remote position where you can say like, yeah, you can trust me to get something done. Like I work okay by myself. I can set good times. I can meet deadlines. I can get things finished. I'm going to speak up and ask questions in appropriate channels when I need help. Those are all good signals, but yeah, absolutely. I can work as part of a team. So it really depends on the company. Do you want to make it sound like you rely on a team, or do you want to make it sound like you don't need to rely on a team, that you're just going to like, lone wolf and cowboy everything you do? I think that there's a balance to strike in there. I think it's important to tell them that you can trust me to do things on my own, but I also appreciate what it means to work on a team. So I think that would be a good way to answer that kind of question, I think. Yeah, thanks for asking that one. Cool. What's up, Tilo? Good to see you. If you've got other questions, feel free to just drop those in chat kind of as we go. I'm just going to take a quick water break here. Dota also said in chat, the HR guy at one place I work like to ask, what would your references say about you? I would be careful, again, just to say like, well, I can't speak for them. I had a good relationship with my coworkers. I tried really hard to maintain good rapport with everybody that I worked with, but I can't really speculate on what they would say. But I will be more than happy to provide references, and you can ask them directly. It kind of defers it a little bit without making it sound like you refuse to answer the question. Because I think it's kind of wise, just in general. Like, don't speak for other people. I think it's kind of a polite thing to do. And you can even say, like, I don't like to speak for other people. I can't put words in their mouth, so I can't really speculate on what they might say about me. But I will provide references as part of the application process if you want them. Yeah. I think another good sort of question or topic to kind of bring up at this point is, what kinds of questions am I allowed to ask your previous employer if I do call for a reference? Because again, there are questions that are illegal to ask. I can't ask them, why you left, or were they terminated, or did you resign on your own? But I can ask questions like, if you had the opportunity to hire this person again, would you do so? If they say no, then that's pretty indicative of like, okay, something happened. You're not welcome back there. But if they say like, yeah, I would happily hire them back, it's like, okay, well then you probably left on your own, to seek another opportunity. And hey, now we may be that opportunity. So there are questions that I'm not allowed to ask. I can't ask, like really all I can ask is, did you work there? When did you work there? What was your title? Those are really the only things I'm allowed to confirm with that company. I may or may not even be able to confirm what your job title was. So I might call them up and say, hey, did Ian Douglas work for you between this date and this date? And they're going to confirm is yes. I've actually worked at companies where they say, if you get called for a reference, all you're allowed to do is confirm that, yes, they worked here. Let me refer you to the HR team and they'll give you information. Or we were told at another company, it's like, don't even answer any questions at all. If you get asked about somebody's work history, just say, I'm actually not authorized to answer those kinds of questions, but I'll put you in contact with our HR team and you can ask them directly. I'd love to have a few more HR folks on the show. I've got a few lined up, and hopefully we can get those kinds of questions answered from them as well. So keep those in mind, and we'll ask them when we get them on the stream. But yeah, so someone mentioned in chat, I had no idea they were limited in what can be said. Limited in what can be said, limited in what they can ask. There are legalities around some of that stuff, and some companies will just refuse to answer questions because they want to protect themselves, because they don't really know who's calling. Funny story. So my very, very first job was when I was in high school. I was a busboy at a restaurant, and I was given the impression that I was fired. I went in to get my paycheck, and they had a stamp on there saying, did Ian return his uniform? And I'm like, oh, I guess I got fired. I got to bring my uniform back. And so I went home, I got the polyester uniform, and I returned it. And I went and got another job, and I ended up working at Wendy's. And I actually really liked working at Wendy's. Wendy's does not sponsor the stream, but I really like Wendy's, but I will not eat their chili. When you know, you know. But when I got the job there, they asked me straight up, like, hey, can we call this other restaurant as a reference? And I'm like, I'd actually prefer you didn't. And I explained why I thought I got fired. And they're like, yeah, no problem. No worries. They hired me. And I went and talked to the GM of the restaurant a couple of months later. I'm like, hey, you've seen me work. You've seen my work ethic. You know what kind of employee I am. I'm curious. Could you call them now and get a reference? I'm kind of curious what they would say. And so she did. She called and she came and got me a little bit later. And she's like, yeah, they said they were really surprised that you just walked in one day with your uniform and said you resigned. I'm like, oh, wow, I thought I got fired from that job. So yeah, it's important to know, like, there are certain things they can ask, certain things they can't ask, and they may be really limited in what they can or will confirm. Some companies will tell you as much as they legally can, and some of them will still want to protect you, especially if you leave on good terms. They'll protect you and say, nope, we're not going to tell anybody anything about you other than the fact that, yeah, you worked here from this date to this date. They may not even confirm your job title. So some things to keep in mind there. Next one on my list. How do I ask a company for feedback? Um, you just straight up ask them for feedback. I generally wouldn't do it during the interview. I think asking them during the interview, like, hey, how's my progress been through the interview so far? Would you hire me? That's going to be difficult to answer, and most of them won't answer that question directly because they're still kind of collecting data. They usually get together as a team once everybody's finished talking to you to kind of figure out, do they want to hire you or not? Do they want to make an offer? And so they generally won't give you feedback on the spot. You may be able to ask, like, if you're working on a tech challenge or something, you could say, this is the best I could do. Do you happen to see any like room for optimization or something that I could have built in there? They may tell you a little bit here or there. But generally, they're probably not going to give you too much feedback. But once the interview is over and you send the thank you message, because I highly recommend you always send a little note of gratitude, thanking them for their time and the effort of going through and interviewing you. And if you can get the contact information from the people that actually interviewed you and send them all individual messages, I think it shows good character personally. I think that when you send that feedback, I would probably ask the recruiter, like, hey, would it be possible for you to collect feedback to share back with me? Aileen Lerner from interviewing.io actually did a study with her team where they surveyed a bunch of companies because there's kind of this myth in the tech industry that if a company gives you feedback, they're going to get sued. And I think there might have been a case for that, like back in the day, where someone was like felt like they were slighted or that they were discriminated against or something like that. And so a lot of companies are like, you know what, we're just not going to give anybody any feedback. But then as an applicant, how are you going to get better if you're not told what you didn't do well? And so I think that you can certainly ask the company for feedback. I think you can certainly say, like, hey, were there things that I could have done better? Or do you have any notes? Like, could you collect some notes from your team? We had Aaron Mullenix and Spencer Allen on the stream on Thursday, and both of them talked at length about, I love actually sitting down and like compiling that feedback and helping somebody understand like what they did well and what they could improve on. I think that that's rare in the tech industry. And so if you can find a company willing to give that feedback, again, it kind of goes back to that respect thing that we talked about earlier. It shows that they're really respectful of your time as well. And those kinds of companies are gold. And those are the kinds of companies you want to stay in contact with and maybe reapply in the future. If they're willing to give you that feedback, like that's fantastic. Not every company will. Some companies, when you email them and ask for that feedback or ask for any notes on things that you could improve if you were to reapply in the future, some of them just won't give you any feedback at all. I would say email them again in a week or two and say, hey, I'm still here. I'm still curious about getting that feedback. Bug them till they tell you to go away. It's kind of what I would say. Like, bug them till they say no. Yeah, that's where I would go with that. Getting down to the last couple of questions here, which is good for timing. I just started a software engineering job at a good startup with good pay and benefits, but then I got invited to the final on-site Google interview. Should I cancel my interview with Google? Well, depends on what you want for your career. If you've already started a job, walking away from that job is going to burn a lot of bridges, and it's going to put that startup in a bad position because it's expensive to hire somebody. It's expensive to go through that process. It's expensive to, source candidates or find people for the role, screen them, do phone calls with them, especially if it's a startup. It's probably engineering management taking time out of their day from things that they should rather be doing in order to interview you for that role. And if you tell them a week later, like, sorry, I'm actually going to go take this other job, that would be a bad thing. I would say, if you've already started the job and you really want to do the Google interview, I'd say you could probably still do the interview. You may just have to figure out, how do you ask a brand new employer for time off really early in your job? Tell them you got a dentist appointment, you're going to be out for the afternoon or something like that. But figure out a way to like get some time off to actually go do the interview if that's super important to you. I think there's a bit of a misconception in our industry that, working for a FANG company is like the epitome of a career. Like, you can't get better than that. And I used to be one of those people. I used to want to go work at a FANG level company. And the longer I've been in the industry and the more that I've kind of watched what those FAANG companies are doing, the more I don't want to work for a FAANG company. That's just my personal preference, though. Not everybody feels that way. I would say if you've started a job and someone else comes in with another offer, that's a different scenario. This question was specifically asking, I've started a job and then I got invited to a final on-site interview at Google. Well, if you've made it to the final on-site, you've gone through a lot of their process, and that's actually a good signal from Google that they want to go to that final interview stage with you. Again, I would say like take the time off and go do the interview, see what happens, see what works out. If they give you an offer, you got to talk to your boss and say, hey, I got this other offer from Google. It just came in. I wasn't expecting to finish it. That's why I took the job here, but I've got this other opportunity. If you're still new enough at the company, it's probably not hurting them too much from a point of like investing knowledge into you. But again, it depends. Has it been like a week? Has it been a month or 6 months? If it's been more than a month, they've probably shared a lot of information with you, and they're going to be a little bit worried about, now we just wasted a month. Like we could have hired someone else and like been a month farther along with someone else. And so it does burn a bridge, and that is something that you're going to kind of have sort of on, not on a record, because we don't really keep like the idea of like a criminal record in our industry, but I think your reputation can precede you. And in startup world, a lot of startups talk to each other. They help each other out. And so later on, if you decide you don't want that job at Google after all, and you start to get back into the startup world, just bear in mind that they may share notes about you and go, I think I remember your name. Didn't you work at like so-and-so for like a week? And now you got to be honest about like what happened. And so just know that those kinds of things can come back and haunt you. My shortest job was 4 hours long. I took a job, I got into the job, I started filling out all the HR paperwork, and about 11 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call with another offer that at a company that I wanted more. And so I talked to the boss. I'm like, hey, all I've done so far is HR paperwork, so I'm out. And I left. And I regretted it in so much that a friend of mine referred me for the job, and they basically hired me with almost no technical interview whatsoever. And it reflected really badly on him for a long time, because this guy put his name on my application. Basically, like, he trusted that I was going to be a good applicant, do a good job, I was going to be a good developer on the team, and then I bail like 4 hours into the job. And that's not a good look. So I regretted it more for my relationship with him as a friend and as a colleague in the industry. And I actually avoided him for like a decade after that because I felt so bad. But once we reconnected, I'm like, hey, I'm really sorry about what happened with that job. He's like, no, actually, you like dodged a bullet on that one, because like within a year, the company went downhill or something. And he started relaying about like how he ended up not liking it there himself, and he ended up leaving too. So it was no big deal in the end, but yeah, it was still awkward. So, I mean, to kind of circle back on this, should you cancel the interview with Google? It's really up to you what you want to do with your career. If you feel like, you know what, I've already started this job, I'm just going to stick it out here for a year and then I'm going to go back to Google. You may be able to shortcut the process again later. You might not. You might have to go through the whole process again at Google. But the fact that you made it to the final round, they're going to have notes on all of that. So when you do apply later on, they're going to say, oh, this person actually did really well in the interview process last time. They may fast track it a little bit. You never know. So it's really up to you with what you want to do with your career there. All right, we got 3 questions left here. And if there's anything else in chat, by all means, drop some other questions in chat kind of as we go. I'm just going to grab some more water here. All right. What are some tech interview questions that are very outdated but still asked? What would be some good examples of those? Can't really think of any specific questions off the top of my head. I mean, there are still like more of the HR style questions that may get asked, like what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses kind of thing. That just shows that they haven't updated their process at all. One of the things that I really appreciated about chatting with Jesse a couple of weeks ago was how, with the pandemic, they had the opportunity to kind of put the brakes on everything, put the brakes on hiring, and put the brakes on the whole interview process, and basically reinvent it and say, you know what, we're just going to take some time and we're just going to like rebuild this whole thing and figure out how we want to do this going forward. And I really have a ton of respect for companies that did that. The company that's employed me now, they actually want some of my input on like what should our interview process be, and I'm really excited to kind of dive in on some of that as well. Part of my role is going to be around like education and onboarding, and part of that is to make our interview process more equitable, where everyone's got better opportunity to join the team, and you don't have to have the magic, mix of technical stack that we have. But when it comes to companies that, maybe they haven't interviewed in a while, like maybe they haven't, they haven't grown in a while, so they haven't had to bring anybody on the team, or everyone's been on the team for like 10 years and they haven't had to interview anybody new in a long time. And so they may ask kind of outdated questions, but if they've been doing the same thing for 10 years and they're still using old technology from 10 years ago, that's also a bit of a flag. So I think that you can pay attention to what those questions are and go, wow, it sounds like really outdated kind of stuff. Like, what are you doing that's more modern? And again, that can kind of play into questions that you should ask them about what their process is and how they're staying modern and current, if they're kind of doing the same thing over a really long period of time. So some things to keep in mind there. So yeah, I would say most of the really outdated things would be probably more on the HR side than on the technical side. Hopefully on the technical side, they've stayed up to date on, Git process and agile workflow. Sorry, I'm bumping my mic here. On agile workflow, Kanban kind of thing, or, how they do their ticket tracking internally. Do they use a tool like Jira or Pivotal Tracker, or, are they using something like Trello, or they literally got Post-it notes on the wall? Like, what kind of process are they following for that kind of stuff? And you'll start to get a sense for whether it feels like it's outdated. But I can't really think off the top of my head like any questions that I know are outdated that are still asked. But that would be a good, interesting one to kind of survey a little bit and see what other companies would say about that. Cool. We got 2 questions left in chat, and then I think I'll probably wrap up for the night. Have you ever given or heard a painfully truthful response when calling to check someone's listed reference for pre-employment screening? So this is basically saying, have you ever called someone about a reference and got like way more information than you expected to get? No, I don't think I have. Nor have I given information that I think would be like above and beyond. Because again, I think it shows respect that I'm not willing to ask those questions and that I'm not willing to give that information about my former employees. I would say the whole idea of reference calling, I think as a whole, feels very outdated to me. And I tweeted about this a while back. It feels a little bit like if you've ever seen the Strange Planet cartoon on Instagram. I think the guy's name is Nathan that makes that cartoon. It's about these aliens that talk in like very plain language about things that are going on. And I think I tweeted a little while back about reference calls. It's like, kind of imagine these aliens talking to each other, like, does this alien or does this being have any concerns? It's like, no, that alien is like the most perfect subject, that I'm aware of, kind of thing. It's like the whole concept of a reference call feels really weird. Like, hey, give me a list of names of people that are only going to say really nice things about you. It's like, I might as well just ask for the phone number for like your mom and say like, what would your mom tell me about you? Well, maybe not. I mean, depending on your relationship with your mom, but I think the whole idea of like calling for references just feels very outdated and very unnecessary. I think that there's not a lot of good signals there. Now, I've certainly given lots of reference calls for folks, like when I taught at Turing for 4 years, I gave a lot of reference calls there. And a lot of those questions would be things like, what would their greatest area of growth be? It's like, okay, well, now I can be a little bit honest and say, well, as their instructor, this is where I saw that they had strengths and this is where I saw they had growth opportunity. But the person that was calling or asking for that reference, they already knew they were an entry level dev. They didn't know a lot of technical things yet, that they still had a lot of learning to do. And so, the best I could do is like kind of say like, yeah, just make sure that, they're currently growing in this area and make sure they continue to grow in that area, just from my perspective as their instructor. But yeah, I think the whole idea of reference calls is kind of silly, to be honest. Yeah. Last one on my list. I didn't think I was going to get through all of these, but chat was a little quiet tonight. So the last one on the list. What are the best ways to identify top talent in your field? So there's a handful of things that I would look for in top talent. Depending on the company and depending on what it is we're trying to do and what we're trying to build. In roles, at the employer that I'm at right now, in the past, so I worked for them before I went to Turing for 4 years, and I went back to that employer, which is why you always want to leave on good terms, because you always want the ability to go back to a job if possible. If you liked it there and they liked you, you always want the ability to go back. The kind of employees that we were hiring back in the day, like 4+ years ago, were people that did a lot of technical writing around subject areas that showed they were an expert on something. And so it was kind of a developer relations kind of role where they were really good at sharing information with other people, positioning themselves as a thought leader or as a technical leader in some kind of area. But mostly that they were just willing to share their knowledge and willing to work on open source projects and things like that. Now that I'm back in the role, I'm not really doing developer relations, and I'm focusing more on the education side. But when I kind of look through the job postings that we have and the kinds of people that we're looking for, we're still certainly looking for lead engineers. We're still certainly looking for people that have, a couple of years of experience or experience leading a team or, full stack kind of experience, but that are also willing to lead a team. And by leading a team, you don't necessarily have to know everything that the team knows, but you do have the opportunity to kind of learn from one person and then share that with someone else. And you're kind of the liaison for other people on the team of like, how can we share all of this knowledge around all of us so that we all get better at what we do? And I think that that's an important trait at any job is how can you share your knowledge? And so when I would look for someone in a role, like if I were hiring for my team, I would be looking for people who are very eager to share what they know and not just hoard that knowledge and keep it to themselves. I've worked with people like that. I've worked with people that have had that mentality of if I'm the only person that knows this thing, then I'm indispensable. And that is the case for a little while, but eventually you're going to be dispensable. Like the company is going to want to get rid of you because you're not willing to share that knowledge. And I think that it's a dangerous thing to sort of hoard that knowledge and be the only keeper of that knowledge, because literally what happens if you get into an accident or something happens and your internet goes out and now the company's in a bad position because you're offline, we can't reach you to get some answer to something. That puts the company in a really bad position, and you have then become what we call a single point of failure. And we don't want a single point of failure, whether it's a hardware system, a software system, or an employee. So I would say within a company, being able to share that knowledge is probably one of the top things I would look for. And that's kind of the catchphrase of this whole channel. It's like, share what you know and we all win. I think that it's important to share that knowledge. That's why I love doing these streams. I hope these answers are helpful. If you got anything else in chat, I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes. If you got other questions, please drop those in chat. And I'm happy to talk about those for a little bit. Aside from that, while I wait to see if chat drops anything, I will talk about Thursday. So normally I stream on Sundays and Thursdays. And this Thursday, I'm not going to stream. I've got something going on. I've got a medical appointment on Wednesday. So I'm actually going to be pretty much offline all day Wednesday, all day Thursday. while I recover. And so I won't be doing a stream Thursday night. I'll probably do a stream next Sunday. I may have somebody on the stream Sunday, but I will not be streaming this coming Thursday. So just FYI on that. And then I expect the Thursday after that I will be back online. And I got a bunch of really great people that are like itching to get on the stream and share what they know. So looking forward to having some really, really cool people. I think the next Thursday stream that I do, that'll be whatever that first Thursday in August is going to be. Whatever date that's going to be. It's going to be the 5th of August, I believe. I think we're going to cover the idea of self-care and mental health as developers. And I think that that's going to be a good topic and how that relates into just technical interview prep and just taking care of ourselves. I think that that's going to be an important determinator for a lot of things. So nothing else came in on chat, so I'm going to wrap up here. Hope you all have a great week. Good luck with the job hunt this week. If you do have questions, you can always reach out to me, ian.douglas@techinterview.guide. I'm always happy to hear from folks over email. If you want to submit a resume for resume review, you can do so via email. If you want to have a free resume review on the stream on a Sunday night, you're welcome to submit those. I do have a couple. I'm a little tired tonight, so I'm not going to do one tonight. But I do have a queue of them to go through. And so you can find out information on that. Go to techinterview.guide/streaming. This video is going to get up on YouTube in a little bit, and I may slice and dice this into some short videos to share out on other platforms kind of as we go throughout the week, but we'll see how my week goes. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful for you. Yeah, we'll see you next time. Cheers.